Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our weekly trade and tariff briefing. I'm Liz Radley, Director of Marketing and Communications at World Trade Center Utah. We're happy to have you here as we continue this weekly series. So, if you're here for the first time, this series is intended to provide you with the latest information about trade and tariffs. This was supposed to be started as sort of a short term solution to the issues happening worldwide, and it has turned into a years long endeavor. So, shout out to our team at World Trade Center for maintaining the dashboard and continuing to do these valuable webinars. We hope you've found value in them as well. So, you can always find the latest on our up-to-date dashboard, which will be linked, and then you can view previous webinars on our YouTube channel. So we'll link both of those in the chat for you. And today we are excited to first hear from Ben Kolendar. He's Chief of Staff at World Trade Center Utah. He'll give us some updates on the tariff dashboard. And then we'll hear from Thomas Cook. He is the Managing Director at Blue Tiger International. So as always, as we go through this webinar, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. We'll be monitoring them throughout. And with that, I will turn it over to Ben.
Thanks, Liz. I'll share my screen. And I'm going to do something slightly out of the ordinary and not start with our dashboard today, but rather start with a webinar that's taking place from the North Dakota District Export Council. So we're not the only ones with great tariff content. Our local commercial service office shared this with us, and it seems like a pretty good opportunity for our business community. So just walking through really quick with folks here. It's a lot of what we're talking about here, but in greater depth. So a lot of what this webinar is going to cover is how to recover duty drawback, using the right shipping terms to reduce exposure, and how to reverse engineer some strategies. Basically, what we talk about all the time here of going on offense. So the webinar is $85 to register. It's on April 7th. If it's something that folks are interested in, we'll put a link in the chat after I'm done with the dashboard. I'll drop it in there so folks have access to it. But just a good bit of information that was shared with us that we wanted to pass along to this community. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the dashboard, and our dashboard can always be found here, wtcutah.com/tariffs, where you can also see the link right here to join the webinars. If you're here, you know that, but if you want to share it with others, you could do that as well. I'm going to jump in and just talk a little bit about 122s for a second. This week we saw a lot of chatter. We haven't seen any formal action take place, but a lot of announcements that the 122 tariff is going to increase from 10 to 15%. So this was raised by Navarro, saying basically it's imminent, it's coming. So we wanted to flag that for the group. So something to monitor. And as always, if you want to check and see if your good is exempted, you can see right here on our dashboard the two annexes that are relevant for those exemptions in the dashboard line item. So the next update we have for you this morning is, and I should say on the 122 tariffs, just something to be aware of, that they do end on July 24th. We don't anticipate Congress extending them right now. We do anticipate other tariffs coming, but we don't anticipate those going beyond July 24th. And we do still have multiple lawsuits out, both from businesses and from some states. So we're going to keep monitoring those as they work their way through the process. If there are any decisions that will change some of those tariffs, we'll be sure to let this group know. So in terms of USMCA, Mexico is in some discussions about the bilateral negotiations there taking place. So there's a lot of push that you could see on zero tariffs on auto exports. So this is a lot of the dialogue with Mexico in the joint review coming up in July, as they're putting an emphasis on that. We still haven't seen too much about any Canada discussions, but we continue to monitor for that. So for now, it remains bilateral discussion, and we anticipate that to continue being that way. And thanks to our friends at Gallon last week for updating us on the situation there and what they anticipate and what they're seeing. The Section 232 on critical minerals closed on March 19th. So that was last week before the webinar. Hopefully, if this is relevant for you, you got the comments in that you were hoping to get in. We still do have two public comments out on 301s. The first is on forced labor. So this is covering about 60 countries. If you do want to click that, you could or provide public comment. And this is if you're importing from any of these 60 countries that are listed in the Federal Register, you want to consider providing comment because this is going to be the reason you want to provide comment is because if there is a decision made on these tariffs to raise them, to increase them, there's always providing public comment requires the government to take every serious comment and incorporate it into their decisions, and it provides some channel for legal recourse if you feel your comment has not been incorporated into the ultimate tariff. Um, so that's the 301 on forced labor. There's also a 301 here, and we'll drop all these in the chat as well. There's a 301 on structural excess capacity and production. So this is some way of, let's say, dumping, and this is both of these really have a lot to do with China, but also the list of 16 countries here that there's some accusation that these countries are providing excess capacity in a way that is not market driven. So those two 301s are significant. And the last thing I'm going to talk, and the public comment closes on April 15th. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is just the refund process again. We get a lot of questions on this. We're looking at April 20th as the likely um, uh, date for customs to have something in place. This is the timeline that they had provided in that closed door session a few weeks ago with the Court of International Trade. So just again, the process is outlined here on mass processing, review and liquidation, refund process, all that is contained right here in what Customs is going through for that April 20th deadline. So anything that you need a primary source document for is right here on our dashboard, and you can click it, go to that link that's in the chat anytime to access that. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tom and make sure we've got all the links that we promised in the chat. So Tom, off to you.
Thank you. Let me get the PowerPoint up. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint? Yep, great. Okay, so thank you all for attending this session, and appreciate the World Trade Center of Utah having us here. So I run a company called Blue Tiger International. We're based in New York, but we have a presence across about 20 different states in North America and in about 7 countries around the world. We help companies navigate the challenges of global trade, and we started a program in tariff management back in 1992, and we have about 20 solutions there. That's not the purpose of this discussion, and I am talking to the World Trade Center about setting up what will be more like a 90-minute to 2-hour webinar, just reviewing all those potential solutions. The discussion today is talking about the direction that customs is going, that started in August of last year and now is moving at a very, very fast pace, which is basically that they're morphing from a trade facilitation organization to a much more aggressive enforcement agency. And that's direct executive orders coming out of the White House, and the management of customs obviously being appointed by the White House, making some significant changes. And as was mentioned earlier, instead of me just lecturing through this discussion, if anybody has a question or a comment, or you're certainly welcome to challenge anything that I put on the table, you're welcome to raise your hand, and how they'll manage the chat, and we can open the conversation up as we move this along. So just as a reference point, when we talk about customs, is that when our country was formed, going all the way back to 1789, and we all know that this year is the 205th anniversary, the first government agency that was formed, even before there was military, was U.S. Customs, because the government needed money to run the company. So collecting duties on goods being imported to the United States was prioritized. And if you walk into any customs office in the United States, above each one of their doors, they have that signature saying first U.S. government agency, and they hold that with pride. In that same year, in 1789, they locked in their first tariff-structured agreement in how they would collect monies on goods coming into the United States. So from 1789 all the way to the 1990s, there weren't really too many changes made other than just the increase in the number of products and the HTS numbers that guided things as they came into the United States. It went all the way to 1993, where they had what was called the Customs Modernization Act, which kind of moved, over 100 plus years, kind of modernizing how customs operated, because a lot of their processes and their controls dated back to the late 17 and early 1800s. In 2001, 2002, after the events of 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security was formed, and Customs moved into that, with its primary focus being an agency that protects our borders, people who cross into it, and goods that cross into the border. But they have a dotted line to Treasury because they're still responsible for collecting duties that come into the Treasury. And in 2003, they started the CTPAT program, the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. And when I get to the conclusion of this, I'm going to make a few comments that, that's a program, if you're not involved in it as an importer and exporter, you really should be, because it raises your profile with customs, and there's only benefits from that. In 2016, in Trump's first administration, and in 2025, we know that Trump has created a very aggressive tariff program. From his perspective, he believes in reciprocity, so he's banging the whole world on their head by increasing the tariffs of their goods coming into the United States. And while a lot of us find chaos and uncertainty and certain disruption with that process, the factor is that more than 50 countries have already successfully negotiated with our government a lower duty rate on U.S. exports into those countries. And there's another 60 to 70 countries that are ongoing negotiations taking place. When it's all said and done, most of the countries around the world will be offering reciprocal tariffs to what we charge for their products coming into the United States. And then in 2025, in the summer, Trump put executive orders to create what he referred to as a much more aggressive enforcement agency with U.S. Customs. His belief is that there's a tremendous amount of fraud that goes on. As a result of that fraud, not the correct amount of money comes into the Treasury. So other factors related to background and customs is that customs has significantly more responsibilities than just handling the import of goods coming into the United States. In the 5 categories that they're responsible for, the gray one is to facilitate lawful trade and protect revenue coming into the United States. That's the area that we work with them as generally as importers in their responsibilities. Everybody in business who's involved in procurement, sourcing, and vendor management, the demand planning process, warehousing, fulfillment, distribution, people involved in manufacturing, operations, including operations as, warehousing and fulfillment, freight and logistics, the movement of the goods from point A to point B, legal and compliance, which are obviously sister issues to the whole process of importing and exporting, and really all supply chain functions. So the actions that the president is taking has a tremendous impact on all these areas and companies. And at the end of the day, it really will impact the ability of a company to control its costs, control its risks, and really exposure to their business model surviving the way they have it structured without creating controls and processes in place to deal with what I'm going to talk about as we move along here. Always appreciate that all government agencies led by customs and importing and exporting requires each of the companies that have import and export operations that from a compliance standpoint, they act with due diligence, reasonable care, and supervision and control. Due diligence and reasonable care is understanding what the import and export regulations are and building them into your business, usually established through creating procedures and training. Okay. And the last is supervision and control. And supervision and control is an often misunderstood thing by importers and exporters. The theory that set this control up was that customs and other government agencies like the Bureau of Industry and Security on Exports recognize that most importers and exporters are going to use custom house brokers and freight forwarders and delegate responsibilities to them. In the Customs Modernization Act in 1993, within that ruling, they put for the first time supervision control, saying that you're perfectly fine in using a third party to handle your transactions, but you have to be and take responsibility for the work they do on your behalf, which means that you have to set up procedures and controls to supervise and control their activity. And those are the three things that from a government standpoint, they have as their edicts. But I add on to another one, my team, called proactive engagement, because every time we're involved with an audit from U.S. Customs or on the export side, the Bureau of Industry and Security, they always ask, how are you keeping informed of regulations? How are you training your people who are in the supply chain and yourself and so forth? So what they're looking for is what we term proactive engagement. And attending a meeting like this, that one of the benefits of the World Trade Center of Utah is these Friday meetings that they have, where they're transferring information to you that is very valuable in allowing you to make better, more informed decisions. Okay. So due diligence, reasonable care, supervision control, and proactive engagement are key edicts of every government agency. We recognize that Trump is utilizing tariffs to negotiate global trade. That has been used for over 250 years by at least 9 different presidents in putting rules and regulations out without going to Congress, and appreciate the fact that the Congress has the authority through the Constitution to navigate tariffs on behalf of the United States. Okay. But the president can overrule that through various executive orders within the context of certain regulations. Regulations 301, 232, and 122 are examples of that. And Ben mentioned earlier about the 301 tariffs. You need to be very careful about the 301 tariffs because Trump, having lost the case in the Supreme Court on the IEEPA tariffs, has shifted to the 122. He's also now have 60 plus countries that are being investigated for various issues led by forced labor issues for the purpose of assessing higher tariffs in that category. So we fully expect that by the end of the year that Trump is going to have additional tariffs in that 301 category justified by the investigations that are being done by the personnel of the Department of Commerce currently. We know that IEEPA was overturned and everybody obviously is lining themselves up for refunds. The key issue here is that we really don't know yet. We expect to know by the 3rd week of April what the process is going to be structured and how it's going to work. What we do know, though, is that every importer, okay, who's looking to get IEEPA refunds needs to have 1, an ACE account, 2, within that ACE account, create an ACH so that money can be transferred electronically. Always keep in mind that Customs changed the laws on January 1st this year that no more paper checks will be issued by Customs. They'll only wire transfer money through the ACE portal through the ACH adaptation. Okay. And the president will continue on. I'm a strategic partner with the Department of Commerce. I was at a high-level meeting. I asked an Undersecretary of Commerce back in January, how long are we going to be involved with this, issuance of new tariffs and these things that come out on a Saturday night and they enacted by the following Wednesday and so forth. And his response was that Trump's got 3 more years left and you should expect that he's going to continue to navigate tariffs to influence how world trade is done. So the administration's aggressive approach to importers specifically is redefining CBP's office's mantra. Okay. In 1993, the term that was used for customs officers was trade facilitators. okay, meaning that they're helping importers and exporters facilitate trade, okay. He's changed that out very directly by saying they're no longer trade facilitators, they're officers of enforcement for the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Treasury. Okay. And if any of you interface directly with customs, in my practice, we're dealing with customs every day, several times. The underlying script of each officer now says United States Treasury Enforcement Officer. So they're putting this out there, making sure that it's clear. Okay. In their effort, they're specifically looking in three defined areas in import transactions. The valuation that's used on the commercial invoice, and if there's related parties involved, this is even being scrutinized much more strictly. Two, the fact that the correct harmonized tariff number is being utilized. And thirdly, is that the origin is the correct origin. And appreciate that the reason that there's a concern here is that when customs does investigations, there's a high degree of fraud being committed, either by open mistakes that are made in judgment or by intentional people looking to evade and creating a fraudulent circumstance. In HTS, our company does line item reviews for companies, and we probably do as many as 30 to 40 different projects a year where we take the companies, all their product lines, and assign HTS numbers to each product code. Okay. On the average, and we go back 36 years as an organization, on the average, we find that almost every company has anywhere between 20 to as high as 30% incorrect HTS numbers. And many times, by making the correction, you're lowering the potential duty rate. And obviously, in some cases, you're actually increasing the duty rate. But from a compliance standpoint, customs wants to make sure you're using the correct HTS number, irrespective of the consequence on duty. So that's a primary responsibility for all companies involved in importing. So the key thing on this slide is that they're going from trade facilitators to trade enforcement officers. And CBP has significant tools available to make sure that, in fact, enforcement is actually being accomplished. AI is the first one, a 30% increase in enforcement officers at all the gateways. And it's really all the major gateways, such as New York and Savannah and Miami and Houston and Los Angeles, Seattle, places like that. Not necessarily all the small places where freight is actually enters into the United States. And they use fear, right? With all the notifications that come out. If you've ever attended meetings with customs, my team attends several meetings a year with customs. They make it very, very, very direct point that they are now enforcement officers. Many carry guns. They obviously have badges, and they have the ability to arrest and detain. I want to give an example of AI because AI they're using very successfully. We had a company contact us 3 months ago, and they're a Baltimore-based importer of dog food ingredients. They have a manufacturing location where they process those ingredients into a final product. The product comes from two related factories, one that they have in China and another one that they have in Australia. And when the tariff went up from the 15% that they were paying up to 25 and then up to 50% on the goods coming out of China, they intentionally moved the freight from China to their Australian subsidiary, okay, and then moved the freight from Australia into the United States, claiming that now the goods originated in Australia, and therefore they paid a significantly lower duty. On one of the shipments that came in 3 months after they started that process, they were caught in Baltimore. And when they were caught, we got brought in to help them mitigate their problem. And so in our conversations with customs, the question we asked was, how did this come about that you pulled their container for inspection and so forth? And they said, we used AI. And I asked them to explain themselves. So they profiled this particular account randomly, okay? And they saw that for the last 5 years, they had a regular flow of containers of the ingredients coming from China, and they had a regular flow of products coming from Australia. okay, coming into the Port of Baltimore every month, 2 or 3 containers arriving. All of a sudden, they saw, and AI put this out there, that all the goods were now coming in from Australia. Nothing was coming in from China. And I also told them that that factory in China was still operating and that they had an ownership interest in it. So they saw a red flag there that there's all of a sudden this major shift in how a company has been doing something for a long period of time. So they pulled that container for inspection. They opened it up, they opened up the boxes, and they saw that the outside boxes showed made in Australia, but the inside boxes had markings of China and showed the fact that, in fact, it came out of a China factory. Okay. So this problem has a serious issue because there was now 3 months of activity prior to this that they committed this fraud. But the bigger issue is that it's now moving to a criminal case because customs seized their computers, okay? And in their computers, they saw the emails that exchanged with the facility where they directed the facility in China to send everything to Australia. So when you have something that's willful or intentional or egregious, it now moves to a level of the fact that it goes from a civil case into potentially a criminal case. So again, the focus is valuation, HTS, and origin. But there's also other issues that we see that they're looking, and our caseload has increased dramatically since about the end of October, beginning of November, and really increased as we got into 2026. They're also looking at issues of record keeping, and always keep in mind that as an importer and exporter, you have to have goods records for 5 years. Okay. They're still looking very heavily at the forced labor issues. And I mentioned the 301 tariffs that are looking very more specifically at 60 plus countries. Okay. They're also now looking for tariff fraud where they know that something has increased because of an executive order. And all of a sudden they see a shift in how a company is declaring something in either one of those categories. So where all of a sudden, a company is paying X dollars in tariffs and that drops off suddenly, that creates a red flag to customs. So appreciate that in this world that we deal with, we have customs officers, which are human beings like all of us. They live in our communities, right? They have families and children and everything like that. So they're human beings. So appreciate the fact that many times when we talk to customs about an executive order, customs themselves is as frustrated as an agency by what the president is doing because he's not giving them sufficient time to evaluate the regulation. A lot of the executive orders are ambiguous, okay? So they have to sort it out because eventually customs has to post to the Federal Register what change is actually being implemented, okay? So appreciate the fact that customs now not only has the normal responsibilities that they've always had, but now they have this whole key circumstance of now looking for a much more intensive methodology where fraud is being committed. Customs has an unforced slowdown. Anybody processing any drawback claims, as an example, is taking longer. The application of foreign trade zones, bonded warehouses, anything that has an impact on flow of money into the Treasury is being slowed down by all the government agencies, and particularly where customs is involved. Okay. Appreciate that their concern now is a focus on duty and tariff revenue coming into the federal government. And appreciate that IEPA was obviously reversed, that everybody became very familiar with several weeks ago. Okay. And we kind of talked that Ben mentioned and I mentioned as well. The key issues with IEPA is making sure you have an ACE account. Within the ACE account that you have an ACH portal. Okay. And also within that portal, you can identify the actual transactions that relate to IEPA. And the sensibility is that at some point in time, when they announce what needs to be done, is that within that portal, you'll be able to obtain the refund, is what we believe the intent is going to be. We have to wait till around the 3rd week of April before that matures. So other recommendations that we make in the face of all these circumstances is that you seek professional guidance and you have multiple sources. There are a lot of things that are subject to interpretation. People have different interpretive processes and so forth. So you need to have multiple sources so that you can look at how different people are interpreting something, so allowing you to make a better, more informed decision. You need to assess the risks that are involved versus the gain. An example is actually a very large company, but a company that has a small amount of imports, but they were all subject to IEEPA tariffs, has asked us, to kind of guide them through the IEEPA process. Um, so we found, as we audited a lot of the transactions, we found what were a number of mistakes, not only in the valuation, but also in the HTS number. So if they file claims for IEPA refunds, they're subject to the fact that customs might review that transaction all over. And if they review it, the mistake that they've created will actually be found. So they have an opportunity to do a disclosure now if they want to do that in advance, or sit back and wait to see whether or not they're going to even file for these claims and whether or not there's risk involved with getting caught.
Hey, Tom, I don't want to cut you off, but we are at our time for the webinar, and I know that some people are needing to get to other meetings. I'm wondering if we can share this PowerPoint presentation with those who participated so that they
Absolutely.
had a couple
Absolutely.
more slides left, and this is
Yep.
such valuable information. Can I ask you to just give us your final wrap up and then some further information of how we can get in touch with you and find out more?
Okay. Um, so there's my contact information on the last slide here. You're all welcome to reach me. We give a 2-hour free consultation that you can reach in and ask questions and so forth. The key issue I think to take from this is that if you're responsible for your imports into your company, you need to make sure that you're dotting the I and crossing the T on all your import regulations. I always make the point that it's not when customs, it's not if customs is going to show up, it's when customs will show up. At some point in time, you're going to have an issue with them if you have a regular flow of imports. And there are tools that they're using now are coming at everybody more aggressively. So that's where I would leave this thought. And I'm sorry that I overran here.
Oh, no, you're just fine. I lost track of the time as well because the information was so great. We really appreciate you and your time. We appreciate everyone who joined us on this call. And we will look at making the PowerPoint presentation available probably through that YouTube link for the recording of this call.
Got it.
Thank you so much, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful day and weekend. And again, you can find this recording on our website.